Hello besties and welcome to another Genshin theory. I was kinda lost on what to do a video on this week, but then I remembered something I think all of us have pretty much forgotten all about. Be honest, how many of you actually watch the Battle Pass cutscene every time it comes up? I remember watching the full thing for the first time it ever came up when I opened Battle Pass for the first time back in November 2020, and since then I've skipped it every time. I obviously can't speak for everyone, but all my friends have agreed that they skip it every time too. To be completely honest, I forgot that it actually had important lore in it. The Battle Pass cutscene seems out of place compared to most other cutscenes in Genshin. There's no recognizable characters or settings, which is probably why a lot of us forgot about it. Here's the cutscene.
Once, there was a glorious kingdom established among the heavens. From that kingdom came a crowned heir, tasked with seeking out the Genesis Pearl from the kingdom of darkness. The first crowned heir began her journey of seeking the pearl. But she was deceived, and the memory of her noble origins faded. She now believed that she was the queen of the kingdom of darkness. But take heart. A second crowned heir has already taken up the path where the first had stumbled. This is the story of your journey, of your tale to be told.
The story's narrator is unnamed, but from what I can hear it sounds a lot like Venti, at least in the English dub. First, we hear about a glorious kingdom in the heavens. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. The kingdom in the heavens is probably Celestia because it doesn't make sense for it to be anything else. From this kingdom came an heir who was told to take the Genesis Pearl from the kingdom of darkness. Again, that's not too out of place. The kingdom of darkness is probably Conria, which was an underground kingdom where no natural light could have possibly existed, making it a kingdom of darkness by definition. The kingdom in the heavens and the kingdom of darkness are kind of familiar, but the Genesis Pearl is totally unheard of. The word Genesis comes from the identical Greek word meaning origin, creation, or generation. Today, the word's most recognizable use is in Judeo-Christian texts, where the book of Genesis is the first in the Old Testament. The book of Genesis details the creation of the world and humanity's early history. Genshin is heavily based on a sect of Christianity called Gnosticism, so it's safe to assume that the use of the word Genesis here is a reference to the Christian book of Genesis. The crowned heir from the kingdom in the heavens was tasked with taking the Genesis Pearl from the kingdom of darkness, likely so the heavens could have it for their own use. We know that Celestia wanted it, and it comes from Conria, but that's it. The tension between Celestia and Conria is well known by every Genshin player by now. 500 years before the events of the game, a world-changing war known as the Cataclysm broke out between both parties, with Celestia commanding the 7 Archons to attack and destroy the underground kingdom. The effects of the Cataclysm are apparent throughout the entire continent of Teyvat today, so much that it feels like everything that happens now can be tied back to the disaster 5 centuries prior. Conria's possession of the Genesis Pearl may be one of the reasons why Celestia attacked Conria. But with something as random as the Genesis Pearl, we really have no way of knowing what it is. It's important enough for Celestia to want to take it from Conria, so it must be pretty powerful. I think the Genesis Pearl has something to do with chemia. Chemia is the form of alchemy pioneered by Rein Dotir, a Conrian scientist responsible for Durin, the Rift Hounds, and the 2 Albedos. Artificial life can be created with chemia. Genesis literally refers to creation, so I think that the Conrian Genesis Pearl is a chemia ingredient. It makes sense for Celestia to send the crowned heir to take the Genesis Pearl because it's not humanity's place to create intelligent life. But once the crowned heir left the kingdom in the heavens to look for the Genesis Pearl in the kingdom of darkness, she was corrupted by a snake. Everything else has been thematically relevant to the game so far, but this snake is 100% out of place. I honestly don't have much to say about it, so bear with me while I try to make sense of it because this is going to be a huge stretch. I think that this snake is the primordial one. In Before Sun and Moon, the Enkanomian book that tells us the early history of Teyvat before Celestia was even formed, we hear of a god called the Primordial One. They were friendly with humanity, even attributing their happiness to the happiness of the humans they created. The Primordial One was liked by pretty much everyone who was around back then. They created 4 shades of themselves, one of which is widely believed to be Istaroth, the god of time. But then another god called the Second Who Came entered Teyvat and waged war on the Primordial One. Long story short, it's implied that the Primordial One passed away in this war and the Second Who Came established Celestia after killing them. In Before Sun and Moon, it's said that the Primordial One's name may have been Phanes. Phanes is the ancient Greek god of procreation and generation of new life. They're always depicted as born from an egg, wearing a crown, and entwined with a serpent. The presence of the snake in Phanes' character is the only thing that makes me think of the Primordial One when I see that snake in the Battle Pass cutscene. But unlike the Primordial One, the snake corrupts the heir from Celestia. The Primordial One wasn't known for doing anything like that, but the Primordial One, or whichever one of their shades this is since they're probably dead, had to have changed over time. The Battle Pass cutscene clearly takes place long after the war that formed Celestia, so the Primordial One's shades have had time to change. For this theory, let's say that the snake is definitively a shade of the Primordial One, even though that's not confirmed to be true. Over time, this shade became angry that the second who came took over Teyvat and ruined the peaceful civilization that they created, so in revenge, they corrupted one of their heirs when they had left the safety of Celestia. When this snake shade saw an opportunity to take revenge on the second who came, they did. The crowned heir was deceived and the memory of her noble origins faded. I think this is exactly what it sounds like. While on her way to Conria to retrieve the Genesis Pearl and bring it back to Celestia, a shade of the Primordial One in the form of a snake corrupted her and she forgot where she came from. That's the end of the story of the first crowned heir, but we still don't know who she is. We only know two things about her. She comes from Celestia and she wears a crown. Again, wearing a crown is pointed out significantly in the Primordial One's character of Faunis. I don't think this heir from Celestia is the Primordial One themselves because they're deceased, but the heir may also be one of their four shades. At the end of her story in the Battle Pass cutscene, it said that she was deceived and she lost memories of her identity. This may be yet another instance of history repeating itself. During the war between the Primordial One and the second who came, I think it would have been a great strategy for the second who came to trick one of the four shades into switching sides. That was the first time this shade, the first crowned heir of Celestia, was corrupted. The snake shade corrupting them again in the Battle Pass cutscene is them reminding the heir of their true self. The heir, no longer bound to Celestia, chose to side with the Kingdom of Darkness from which they originated and not hand over the Genesis Pearl to the Kingdom in the Heavens. The Primordial One was well liked in Enkanomiya, another underground civilization that felt uncared for by the gods. Enkanomiya used to exist above ground before it sank into the ocean when the second who came started their war. For the first few years when they were underground, Enkanomiyans hoped that the Primordial One would come to save them, but they never did. They assumed that this was because the Primordial One no longer cared for them, but really it was probably just because they were killed. The Primordial One and by extension their shades have already been established as a beacon of hope for civilizations trapped beneath the Earth's surface. I've already done a theory on how Istaroth, the god of time who is heavily implied to be one of the Primordial One's four shades, may be responsible for helping Conria behind the scenes. The snake shade may be Istaroth, or it could just be another of the four shades. Either way, I think the Primordial One, as a god who loves humanity, would want to actively help Conria, the Kingdom of Darkness, by any means necessary, including corrupting the first heir and turning them over to a different side. At the end of the Battle Pass cutscene, it said that the second crowned heir has already taken up the path where the first had stumbled. This is the story of your journey. The game is literally telling us without a doubt that this is our story, the story of the Traveler. When you first start Genshin Impact, you get a cutscene where the two travelers, Aether and Lumine, are attacked by the unknown god and separated. This happened 500 years ago during the Cataclysm, right at the beginning. One of the twins woke up during the war and later became the Abyss Prince or Princess, depending on who you chose to play as. The other woke up 500 years later in above ground Teyvat, where they become the Traveler. One of the first things the Traveler does when they wake up is meet Paimon, who acts as a guide throughout our journey. I think that the crowned heirs from Celestia are Paimon and the Traveler. Paimon fits nowhere in the grand scheme of Genshin's story. No matter where you place her, it just doesn't feel right. Saying that she's one of the Primordial One's shades certainly adds up when you remember that she also wears a crown and was born from an egg, but that's about it. I like the idea of her being the first crowned heir because it gives her a reason to exist within the game. It makes her less of a random character and it ties her to the Traveler, who is supposedly here to pick up the pieces of her failure. As for the Traveler being the second heir, the game literally says so, but it also makes sense when you think about it. Aether and Lumine showed up in Teyvat, seemingly in Celestia giving the surroundings we see in the opening cutscene, but were corrupted by the unknown god and separated. The Abyss Twin was immediately thrown into Conria with no regard from the unknown god, but the Traveler was kept asleep for 500 years. After all that time, they're unknowingly embarking on the same journey that Paimon did a long time ago, going to Conria in search of something that Celestia doesn't want to exist. For Paimon, it's the Genesis Pearl, and for the Traveler, it's their sibling. Obviously, I don't think that Paimon or the Traveler knows that they're the heirs from the Battle Pass cutscene. They've never brought it up before, so maybe when they were corrupted or asleep, that information somehow got lost. With Paimon, I feel like we'll definitely see her remember her past eventually, but I don't think the Traveler is literally a crowned heir of Celestia. I think referring to them as the second crowned heir is more of a symbolic thing than something literal. I still think there's not enough information to know what's actually going on in the Battle Pass cutscene though. I could be completely wrong. I feel like it would be cool if we got to see this cutscene again in an Archon quest at some point, but if that was gonna happen, I feel like it would have to be all the way in Conria. So I don't think we're gonna get any elaboration on this thing for a really long time. I see a lot of people say that they think the heirs in the cutscene are the two travelers or one of them and Dainsleif, but I want the first to be Paimon so bad because I'm just tired of not knowing what to do with her. I just want to be able to put her somewhere in the story and feel good about it. But again, I don't think I'm going to be able to do that for a really long time. In other news, as you can see from this background gameplay, I finally got Nilou. I had her guaranteed because I had a ton of pulls, but I ended up winning the 50-50 anyway, so I guess that means I'm for sure getting Nahida. Best of luck to everyone pulling for Nilou and Albedo. I have them both, and I love them both. Thank you so much for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and I'll see you next time. Bye, besties!